Okay, guys, welcome back to a new video here. And as I'm sure many of you guys have heard by now, President Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States, passed away yesterday at the age of 100 years old. Pretty stunning. He was in hospice for 2 years, and he made it all the way to 100 years old. So pretty extraordinary. And guys, I got to be honest with you. I've been doing a lot of research on Jimmy Carter the last 24 hours. He's a lot more based and interesting than I originally thought. He really does have a very complicated legacy. And one thing which we're going to talk about right now that I think most people can agree on, even Republicans, Democrats, post presidency, he is without a doubt the most moral president, and his humanitarian efforts are truly extraordinary and wild. And he is the only president, guys, in modern American history that really has not cashed in. He did not become super rich and famous and basically do all these speeches for millions of dollars, unlike many of the other modern presidents that we've seen. And let's just talk about his background to start. And by the way, guys, if you've been liking the content, make sure to like and subscribe. It's super good for the algorithm. I got Amazon products. I'm an affiliate in the description. If you guys like any of the products, you can click on the links. Now, let's talk about his background. He grew up in the 1920s in rural Georgia, guys. And the reason Jimmy Carter originally went into politics is because on the issue of segregation. That's pretty wild. And again, I'm sure many of you guys are like, segregation in the 1920s. Like, yeah, why would you not be against segregation? Of course, obviously. But guys, in the 1920s in rural Georgia, being a white boy, you're probably, most people around there are probably very racist. So the fact that Jimmy Carter would make this his issue that he goes into politics on, it's pretty extraordinary. This is his origin. The 1920s in rural Georgia went into politics on the issue of segregation. And again, when I'm talking about not cashing on the presidency, for example, one thing he did very famously in order to avoid a conflict of interest, and the reason he was elected, guys, was because he was kind of viewed as an outsider of the establishment. He was viewed as a common man and a normal person, which is why he was viewed as kind of a populist candidate. And the reason why he was elected, guys, is because there was a lot of distrust in the previous administration, the Nixon-Ford administration. Ford had pardoned Nixon for a lot of his crimes, and there was a ton of distrust in the federal government. Kind of common to what we see now, if I'm being totally honest with you. And one famous thing Carter did to avoid conflict of interest, which is in stark contrast to guys like Trump, who has lived golf events with Saudi Arabia and doesn't sell any of his business interests. I mean, it's unbelievable. Jimmy Carter actually sold his family peanut farm, which it was very close to him, and a peanut farm. He sold it in order to avoid any sort of conflict of interest. Imagine something like that happening today. It wouldn't happen. But it just goes to show you the moral integrity of someone like Carter as opposed to many of these other presidents. Now, let's talk about domestic policy, which is, again, mostly viewed as very negative, but he did do a lot of good things. He established a Department of Education on the federal level, which I think is super based. Republicans would say no, but I think that's super based. Established a Department of Energy, and one of the great things he did too, and guys, this is not the 2020, this is the 1970s. He was extremely supportive of renewable energy. In fact, he very famously at the White House had tried to install solar panels to kind of show it's not just all talk. We're actually going to take action at this. So again, a lot of energy initiatives, renewable energy initiatives that was very uncommon for his time that he did. Raise the minimum wage on the federal level, again, super based. And it's in the news right now. He gave the Panama Canal back to Panama in a negotiation, which was, again, for Panama was great. And again, it's very controversial now with Trump, but I would argue that was definitely a beneficial thing. He normalized relations with China, again, super base. And what we're going to see as we get to foreign policy, Carter oftentimes opted for diplomacy as opposed to just guns a-blazing, which we see in the modern era, which with a lot of these presidents. Most of the time, he very famously, they say he never fired a shot. It's not exactly true, which we're also going to talk about in foreign policy, but in terms of diplomacy, this was without a question. He did not opt for guns and war as opposed to other presidents. And honestly, that's synonymous with his post-presidential life as well. Normalized relations with China. And hey, unfortunately, definitely the reason he lost the election, he faced a very heated contested primary with Ted Kennedy, which kind of weakened him going into the election. And the number one thing, which you'll probably hear about Jimmy Carter and why he lost the election on domestic policy, he dealt with a horrible economy, stagflation, many of which was some of the conditions from the previous administration, but that's kind of how it works, guys. If there's a bad economy or there's a perceived bad economy, you're going to lose the election. Look what just happened in 2024. So, but Jimmy Carter dealt with stagflation, which is basically a number of economic conditions all going wrong at the same time. He dealt with high inflation, and in order to combat high inflation, he basically created stagflation where he tried to create conditions where unemployment would raise in order to lower inflation. And that worked, but it didn't. Most people aren't going to be happy when they're unemployed. They're going to blame the government and Jimmy Carter for that, which is exactly what happened, which led to Reagan coming in a landslide election. But again, the economy, not great, and that's kind of why he's viewed as a poor president. But I listed a number of other achievements he had that were pretty incredible and have had a long-lasting impact all the way up until today. Now, on foreign policy, which I would say is super, super interesting, guys, he, number one, normalized relations with China, which I said is super based, and probably one of his biggest achievements, I would argue maybe his biggest achievement, was the Camp David Accords, where he negotiated peace between Israel and Egypt, which were at the time two warring countries, and that peace has lasted all the way until today. One of his greatest achievements as president of the United States, and he deserves immense credit for that. But again, also, and people say he hasn't fired a shot, for example. It's not exactly true. He funded the East Timor genocide, guys. I mean, it's a very long story. You guys can do some research on that. But the East Timor genocide, the guns and the weapons that were used in that genocide were supplied by the United States and Jimmy Carter to the government of Indonesia. But again, if you ask him today, he actually said he wasn't really aware of the full ramifications of the weaponry, and is one of his regrets that he has. But again, most people in mainstream media, they don't care about this. They're not going to say this, but it's just something that it is the truth. He did fund some countries that committed horrible crimes, but he also took weaponry back from other countries who were committing a lot of war crimes and grave atrocities, which is very also uncommon to a lot of other presidents at that time. And again, one of the reasons why he also lost the election, and a major negative on foreign policy, was the Iranian hostage crisis. And there is, without a doubt, he deserves, in my opinion, basically no blame for that. It is ridiculous. In fact, one of the crazy story, guys, about the Iranian hostage crisis was Jimmy Carter had actually negotiated a settlement with the Iranian government in place at the time, but through back channels, the Reagan campaign had an agreement, which is, guys, I mean, it's criminal in nature. It truly is. They were, very criminal. They negotiated with the Iranian government, the Reagan campaign, to not release the hostages until Reagan came in office. Because it would help Carter. If they were released under Carter, it would help Carter, and the Iranian government preferred Reagan. What? So they did not release the hostages until Jimmy Carter was out of office, even though the resolution was created and made and negotiated by the Carter administration. But Reagan just got credit for it because he wanted a political win, which, guys, that is pretty dark shit. That's dark shit. And again, pretty wild stuff. I would argue Reagan deserves no credit for that. In fact, he deserves a lot of blame for how that was handled in his campaign. It's criminal in nature, if you ask me. So I would give Carter more credit than not, but there's no question that it was huge electorally for Carter, and it hurt him significantly in the race because it took so long to release the hostages. But again, that's one of his big things that people are going to remember Jimmy Carter for. Now, as far as post-presidency, guys, and I would say probably the best part of his legacy is his post-presidency. He truly had an outstanding post-presidency, objectively speaking. I don't think anyone would really dispute this. Pretty shocking views, and just relative to other presidents. Very pro-Palestinian, guys. He actually wrote a book. He called Israel an apartheid state. Again, pretty wild, considering no sitting president would ever, or any living president would ever say that today about Israel. And he was massive advocacy for human rights as well as the Palestinian people. Criticizing Israel viciously, which is, again, stunning in terms of the American political landscape. He talked about money in politics as basically bribery. The Citizens United decision is basically bribery. He said the money in politics is corrupting our politicians on a scale that the American people could not possibly imagine. Again, no modern president, guys, is going to talk about money in politics and the significance it has on that level. And again, he does not cash in on politics. He was relatively modest in means later in life. He was not doing all these speeches for hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars in many cases. In fact, the money in politics things, he actually called it an oligarchy in many sense of what the system we have in place now is. So kind of based on that front too, which I think is definitely true. And the Carter Center has done incredible stuff. Habitat for Humanity, guys, where he would build houses for people and charitable work all across the world, where he actually helped fund medicines that would, guinea worm disease, I think it was called, where he basically cured a lot of diseases in these developing countries. So he saved thousands of lives. The Carter Center has done a fantastic job on a humanitarian level, and he was directly involved with it. So I think humanitarian and post-presidency, there's no question he was a fantastic post-president. There's no doubt about it. But because of how the economy was under his administration, which was very poor, and how he kind of was perceived, he was also perceived as rather weak, guys. There's a lot of similarities to the Biden administration in many ways, honestly. But I think post-presidency, he was a great president. As president, because of the poor economy and because of how he was perceived, while there was positives, he was not viewed as a strong leader, which is why he lost the election. But again, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, but it's very sad that he passed away at the age of 100 years old. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. It's super good for the algorithm. And again, Amazon links in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.